Org. Washington Journal continues.
Joining us now from Baghdad, Iraq, is Lieutenant General Stephen Townsend. He serves as Commanding General of the Combined Joint Task Force taking on ISIS in Iraq and Syria. And General, before we get to the latest on the fight for Mosul, can you first explain who makes up that Combined Joint Task Force and how many U.S. service members are part of that mission over there right now?
Sure. So my name is General Steve Townsend. I command the U.S. Army's 18th Airborne Corps back at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And here in Iraq, I command Combined and Joint Task Force Operation Inherent Resolve. This coalition is made up of over 60 nations that participate in various levels. There are about 19 or 20 troop contributing nations that contribute troops on the ground or in the air or at sea here that are facing off against ISIL. And all told, the U.S. troops on the ground or here in the Joint Task Force are over 8,000 and between Iraq and Syria and the surrounding region. And coalition troops number another almost 4,000.
And General, appreciate you working with us on this bit of delay that we have as we do this interview. But take us through, what are the main ways that U.S. service members are participating in this fight? How close are they getting to the front lines, especially in this fight that we see so much about in the news headlines, this fight to retake Mosul?
Sure. Well, the first thing we do is we enable our partners here, the Iraqi and Syrian partners, with equipment to help them be successful and increase their capability with training, usually more advanced type training. They do the basic kind of training on their own. Then we also assist them with advisors who accompany their headquarters and commanders on operations. And then we provide them enabling capabilities. Some examples of that would be intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance assets, close air support, artillery, things like that.
And when we talk about the battle to retake Mosul, close air support, artillery, it gets tougher to use those things in the battle to retake Mosul. So at this point, can you talk about how that effort is going in Mosul and what the main U.S. role is specifically there in the battle for that city?
Sure. Your question's about Mosul, and I think that the operation in Mosul, the Iraqi Security Forces operation in Mosul, is going pretty well. If you think about where this army was 18 months ago, 2 years ago, it was a defeated army barricading the gates of Baghdad to keep ISIL out. In the last 2 years, they have recovered their footing, retrained their army, thrown ISIL back, liberated about half of the ISIL-controlled territory in Iraq. And they have now attacked to liberate Mosul, the largest city held by ISIL in Iraq or anywhere. And that city is 300 or 400 kilometers from their capital here in Baghdad. So pretty remarkable turnaround. Our coalition forces are up there doing some of the tasks that I described. So most of the training and equipping has already gone on, and now we're down to advising and enabling capabilities, and there are U.S. and coalition troops up in and around Mosul with their Iraqi counterparts in the skies overhead, providing intelligence and close air support, and on the ground some distance away, providing artillery fires, and closer to Mosul with Iraqi headquarters and commanders making decisions.
Should note in this segment of the Washington Journal, a special line for Iraq veterans. If you want to call in, talk to General Stephen Townsend, who's the commanding general of Operation Inherent Resolve. That phone number for Iraq veterans, 202-748-8003. Otherwise, phone lines as usual. Democrats, 202-748-8000. Republicans, 202-748-8003. 8001, Independence 202-748-8002. And as viewers are calling in, General, want to talk to you a little bit about our allies in this fight, the ones who are in the front lines, who are going into the city of Mosul. We hear mixed reviews at times about the reliability of some of those allies. Who are the best, who are our best assets over there? Who's proving to be the best at taking this fight to ISIS in the city of Mosul?
Well, the Iraqi security forces are a broad spectrum of type of forces and capabilities. So first you have the Iraqi army. There are more than 9 brigades of the Iraqi army involved in the Mosul operation right now. And they're in various states of training and readiness. As you might imagine in any army, the units of the army are in varying states of training and readiness. Some of the best are up there around Mosul now. There are Iraqi federal police, something like a gendarmerie, sort of a combat-capable police force. Again, their elements are in various states of readiness. They're up there now, and probably parts of them are better than some army units better than parts of the federal police. There are Iraqi local police. Think of them more like police forces in the United States, mostly law and order, but they're being pressed to do some combat type of duties because of the situation. But they're not really trained and equipped for that as much. There are tribal hold forces. Think of neighborhoods securing their own village, volunteers from the neighborhood securing their own village. There are militia forces that have responded to calls to defend Iraq, and they have a wide range of capabilities. And probably the best overall force is the Iraqi Counterterrorism Service. Until recently, they were part of the armed forces. They're now a separate force just recently. But they've had a training relationship with U.S. Special Operations Forces even since 2011, during the time period between 11 and 14. And so they're probably the most capable of all the forces. But all these forces are engaged in Mosul and taking the fight to the enemy there, ISIL.
And as that fight happens, we have heard reports of upwards of 1 million civilians still in Mosul. What's being done? What are you trying to do to work with our allies there to reduce civilian casualties, collateral damage in the city and to the innocent people that are there?
Well, the greatest level of concern, I think, for the Iraqi people comes from the Iraqi government and the Iraqi security forces. They certainly don't want to inflict unnecessary casualties on their own people and damage to their own infrastructure. Second behind the government of Iraq would be the coalition. We're here at the invitation of the government of Iraq, and so we don't want to inflict unnecessary collateral damage or civilian casualties. So we're probably running, and you've heard this before, I think we're running the most precise campaign in the history of warfare here. We go to extraordinary lengths to try to avoid civilian casualties, and when we think that when we hear that we may have inflicted civilian casualties through our own reporting or through media or watchdog groups that are out there, we investigate each and every one of those reports to determine if it's credible or not credible, and if credible, we investigate to find out how we inflicted those civilian casualties or collateral damage and how we can avoid it in the future. So there's a lot of concern at all levels here for civilian casualties, and we work really hard to avoid those.
General Stephen Townsend is our guest. As we said, phone lines are open for viewers to ask their questions. A special line for Iraq veterans, 202-748-8003. Otherwise, Democrats, 202-748-8000. Republicans, 202-748-8001. Independents, 202-748-8002. We're going to start with Kendrick in Lancaster, South Carolina, an independent. And Kendrick, bear with us with a little bit of a delay as we talk to the General live from Baghdad. Go ahead with your question.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Go ahead. Yep.
Yeah. Well, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. I've seen this record. I've heard this before. We train the soldiers. We've been in Iraq over 10 years. We go train them, and then when it comes to the fight, when ISIS was coming, they throw down their weapons and ran. We've been there losing lives and causing lives. Well, what is the end game? Well, we can continue to fight their battles for them. They're going to have to learn to fight their own battles. We've been training and assisting Iraqis for over 10 years, and ain't nothing changed. They still ain't got, you say, well, they got a elite fighting force. They fighting. What I see on TV, without us being there pushing them, they would never fight.
Kendrick, got your question, General Townsend, on the end game and the concerns about doing the same thing over and over again in Iraq.
Yeah, thanks there, Kendrick. Yeah, I've heard that definition of insanity as well. I would suggest that we're not doing the same thing over and over again. So your point that we've been in Iraq for more than 10 years. Actually, we were in Iraq from 2003 until 2011, and then we left. We left because the government of Iraq didn't desire us to be here anymore. They invited us back in 2011, so there's the first thing that we're doing differently than last time. We're here at the invitation of the government of Iraq. And I'll tell you the other big difference. You say that if we weren't here pushing them, they wouldn't be fighting. That's not the case at all. I was here during the previous Iraq war. And in those days, we led the fight, and we brought the Iraqi armed forces, the security forces, along with us on operations. That's not the case here at all. We're not leading the fight. In fact, there aren't coalition soldiers at the front leading the way, engaging the enemy directly. Who's doing that? The Iraqi security forces. The counterterrorism service, the Iraqi army, the Iraqi police are the ones leading the way, doing the fight, taking the fight to the enemy. Our forces are behind them, giving their commanders advice and giving some help with enabling capabilities. But the Iraqis have their own artillery, they have their own air force, they're using it. We're just helping them. They have their own intelligence capabilities. We're just helping that effort. So it's a completely different situation today than it was from Operation Iraqi Freedom, which I participated in.
On that line for Iraq war veterans, Joe joins us from Sun City Center, Florida. Joe, good morning. You're on with the General.
Hey, General, I was in Fallujah. Let's see. We took 5 cities, and George H. didn't go any further. He didn't want to destabilize the area, so he pulled out. So the Iraq people awarded the Russians with the oil drilling rights, which was kind of cruel, 5,000 people, that's roughly 40,000 gallons of blood, W. Bush went in and destabilized everything, and, all the doo-doo hit the fan, and, after I got out of the service, I got a job on the base as a civil servant, and I used to work for the Admiral's Row. And one confided in me. He said the president dismisses all the generals and admirals and appoints his generals and admirals. I'd like a response.
What's the question, Joe, before we turn it over to the General?
Is it true or false that we turned over the drilling rights to Russia, and is it true that the president dismisses all of his generals?
Got your point, Joe. We'll turn it over to General Townsend.
Okay, thanks, Joe, for that interesting question. I'm not sure what it has to do with Operation Inherent Resolve, but I'll give it a shot. First of all, thanks for your service. You called in on the Veterans Line, and you mentioned that you were in uniform and you were a civil servant for a while, so thanks for your service to our nation. I'll just kind of say this. I'm not sure about drilling rights. I don't think, actually, that the Russians have exclusive use to drilling rights here. Iraq does the drilling of oil here and sells it on the international market. That's how that works. And it's not true that each president fires all the generals and admirals and rehires his own generals and admirals. That's not how our system works. In fact, generals and admirals sustain their roles. We all serve at the pleasure of the Commander-in-Chief. I guess that in theory, Commander-in-Chief could fire generals and admirals, but typically they don't. And if you just look at over history who's in positions from one administration to the next, you'll probably see a remarkable link of and line of continuity there that probably serves our nation well. Thanks for the question, Joe.
General, a question for you about the strategy right now. A lot of focus on Mosul. It's what we're seeing a lot of back here at home. But can you talk about what's happening concurrently in Syria as well, and what the U.S. is doing there, and what happens after Mosul falls, sort of what the overall strategy is for the U.S. campaign against ISIL?
Sure. Okay. So, ISIL, also known as the Islamic State, is a threat not only to this region but to the entire world. All you have to do is look at recent events in Europe and even in the United States to know that. Some examples are Belgium, France, Florida, New York, Texas, etc. So it's very important that the whole world coalition bear down on this problem. Why are we so focused here on Iraq and Syria? ISIL and its franchises are a worldwide phenomenon. However, the core of ISIL and the manifestation of its physical caliphate, so-called caliphate, is right here in Iraq and Syria. This is where it started. This is where their leader, Abu al-Baghdadi, declared the physical caliphate to exist. The capital is in Raqqa, Syria. The capital in Iraq, and its largest physical holding is in the city of Mosul here in Iraq. So that's why Mosul is very important, and defeating ISIL in Mosul is critical. Also in Raqqa, so you mentioned what are we doing in Syria. So right now we're engaged with our partners there in an approach march to the city of Raqqa, the self-proclaimed capital of the so-called caliphate of the Islamic State. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down there and take Raqqa and liberate Raqqa, take it back from ISIL and give it back to the people, the rightful owners. What this will do is it will, I think, do a lot to destroy the narrative of ISIL, which is their mythology has depended a lot on having this physical state, quasi-state. And when they lose their capital in Iraq and they lose their overall capital in Syria, I think it goes a lot to discrediting their narrative as a terrorist organization. Then what happens after Mosul? I don't think that ISIL is completely defeated or destroyed in Iraq and Syria with the liberation of Mosul and Raqqa in Syria. ISIL will still persist here. Our partners in Iraq and Syria are going to have to keep working to reduce that threat. And what we're ultimately working towards is reducing the threat of ISIL here and building up the local security forces to a level where they can handle any persistent threat that remains on their own without a lot of help from the coalition.
Just one follow-up on that for your answer. You talk about that after we kick them out of Raqqa, we're going to give Raqqa back to its rightful owners. How do you figure out who the rightful owners are right now in Syria amid a civil war that pits several different rebel groups against the Syrian government?
Okay. So first of all, we're not charged with helping to solve the civil war. The civil war that's ongoing in Syria is certainly a complicator for us, but our mission is to defeat ISIL in Syria, and specifically in northern Syria. So how do we figure out who the rightful owners are? Well, typically we just kind of ask them, right? We ask the locals. It's our effort here. A lot of time and energy goes into recruiting folks from the local area. So, for example, our local partner force will go to great lengths to recruit folks from the Raqqa area to make sure that that force is representative of the local citizenry and looks like them, is from them. And we'll ask them to govern themselves and secure themselves. So eventually the Liberation Force, which may come from all over northern Syria, and the coalition will move on, but the force that's left behind will be folks from Raqqa. And an example of that you can see in Shaddadi and Hasaka and in Manbij. These are other towns and cities in northern Syria, and they've been turned back over to local people to govern and secure.
Back to the phones. Barnett is waiting in Marshall, North Carolina, on that line for Democrats. Barnett, good morning.
Good morning. I've got one question for the general. Would he please tell me how many mercenaries the United States has got over there, like Blackwater? That's the only question I got.
General, on contractors.
Okay, thanks, Barnett. We don't really have any mercenaries over here. So mercenaries, in my mind, mercenaries are paid to fight. Civilian or contractors, non-military personnel who are paid to fight. We don't have any of those over here. What we do have is our contractors who are performing security duties, many of them for the United States or for other countries. The coalition over here, and they do things like guard VIPs, they help guard embassies, they help guard the United States Embassy. They do functions like that to free up or reduce the need for military forces to do that. We also have contractors over here that cook our food and serve it to us, and they perform a wide range of tasks so we can reduce our uniformed footprint here to that is necessary. So no mercenaries, but plenty of contractors, some of whom are performing security duties over here.
Kathleen is in St. Johnsville, New York, Republican. Go ahead, Kathleen.
I'm calling before. First, I have a comment that I believe our National Guard should be here protecting our nation, not over in the Middle East. And secondly, I really feel that if the people over there are in Iraq particularly are handling their defense well, then we just don't belong there. Let those people settle their own problems. Thank you.
General Townsend.
Okay. Well, she made a comment. She didn't really ask me a question. Do you want me to respond to her comment?
Please, sir, if you would.
Okay. Well, she made a comment about the role of the National Guard, and I don't disagree with her that the National Guard actually does help secure our own country, America. In the states, they help secure the states, and they help secure our nation there. They're also part of our armed forces, and they're part of the normal rotation of the U.S. Armed Forces overseas, so National Guard units get mobilized. That's their charter. That's why they exist, not only to protect America at home, but to go do, as part of the regular forces, security operations and military operations overseas. So we have a number of National Guard soldiers and units here today. They've been mobilized and on federal duty, and they're performing just like the rest of our armed forces, and performing very well, and I'm very proud to serve alongside of them, have them in our formation. And then when they get done here, they'll go back home and they'll resume their duties as National Guardsmen defending their state and defending America at home. Then I think, well, I don't remember what a second question was exactly.
That's all right. We have plenty of callers that still want to talk to you as well. Martin is
handling defense. Yeah, thank you. So I got it. All right. She was mentioning that she thought that the local folks should handle their own defense, and they should. And the reason we came here, for a long time, we watched Iraq struggle against the threat that is ISIL. And eventually, the United States and the World Coalition determined that we needed to be involved because, again, as I pointed out earlier, ISIL's not just a threat to Iraq, it's a threat to America. And that's first and foremost why we're here, to fight this threat here rather than on our shores.
Let's go to Martin. Egg Harbor City, New Jersey, an independent. Martin, you're on with General Townsend, the Commanding General of Operation Inherent Resolve.
In the fight against ISIS, I heard to my surprise that General Petraeus, sometime this year or a lot part of last year, and I forget who he was saying it was, or what, or if it was on C-SPAN or not, gave a positive response to about favoring a reduction in the effectiveness of collateral damage that would be more beneficial in going after ISIS.
Martin, we're losing you a little bit. We'll try to get that line a little bit better and try to get back to you. Let's go to Anthony in Hackettstown, New Jersey, a Democrat. Anthony, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, C-SPAN, and General, thank you for your service to America. I'm pretty sure that eventually Iraq will be win their civil war, but is there any type of political solution in the horizon? I'll take your response off there, and thank you once again, and happy Thanksgiving, sir.
Thanks for the question, Anthony. General, go ahead.
Thanks, Anthony, and happy Thanksgiving to you. So is there a political solution on the horizon? So first thing, we have to do in our mission here, the military mission, is to defeat ISIL. I'm not here necessarily to facilitate a broader political solution in Iraq, although it's certainly of our interest, and we think for this thing to have lasting effect, there's going to have to be some political reconciliation here in Iraq. And so there are a lot of competing interests here, political interests, ethnic interests, religious interests. That kind of is the environment that we live in here in Iraq. And so as I watch it, I'm hopeful that there's a broader political solution that will bring greater stability here to Iraq. In fact, you could probably argue that it was a lack of that kind of political solution that you're talking about that caused the rise of ISIS after al-Qaeda in Iraq was essentially defeated by 2011. ISIS rose in their place because I think this thing that you're alluding to, this lack of a political solution here. So it's very important, I think, that we have achieved some sort of political solution here in Iraq as well, that all the people of Iraq have to look at their government and feel like it's representative of their interests, and that the Iraqi security force can secure all of them equally. And until we get that, I think that's the requirement to guarantee that another threat doesn't rise in the place of ISIL after they're defeated.
The caller there wishing you a happy Thanksgiving. Can you take a minute and give us a sense of what Thanksgiving was like for our troops deployed to Iraq in this Thanksgiving?
Sure. So I got to see Thanksgiving on all ends of the spectrum. My command sergeant major and I traveled out to the field very close to Mosul. And we visited some forward U.S. troops in an artillery firing position on the battlefield on the day before Thanksgiving. And we visited some of our special operations folks nearby. and some troops from the 101st Airborne Division. And they were out there in the field, but yet they were getting a full Thanksgiving meal. Our military, regardless of where we are in the world, we usually go all out. Pull out all stops to try to deliver Thanksgiving meal to our soldiers. They may be sitting in the dirt on the side of a mountain somewhere, but we're going to get them a hot turkey dinner with stuffing and all the trimmings and pumpkin pie if we can accomplish it. We did that to our troops forward on the battlefield. Then I was able to come back to one of our larger bases and see Thanksgiving with all the trimmings in a Army dining facility, a chow hall, and all that you would expect of a Thanksgiving meal back home. We try to reduce our activities on Thanksgiving where we can and let the soldiers enjoy a little time off and maybe watch a little bit of football on Armed Forces Network. But there are soldiers engaged. We're engaged in a war here, in combat operations, so not everybody got a day off. Certainly the soldiers in the field did not, and even those back at headquarters had to take turns pulling duty while others watched some football and ate some turkey.
Flat Rock, Michigan is next. Tim is on our line for Democrats. Tim, good morning. You're on with the General.
Thank you, General. Mr. Townsend, I was just wondering, how does drone technology working over there? Is it, a lot less footprint on the ground, more covert? And that's my question. Thank you for your service.
Thanks for the call, Tim. General, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Tim. So drone technology, of course, I don't think anybody uses drones more than remotely piloted vehicles or aircraft more than the United States and the Western Coalition. So we use them all the time. And probably drone employment here is at an all-time high in the history of warfare. We use them for just about everything, and we're constantly looking for and watching the enemy with them. Interestingly enough, this is probably the first time in the history of our armed forces that we faced an enemy drone threat. So even ISIL is employing drones here, and we have had to field a lot of capabilities over the course of just this war in the last year or so. In fact, we're still fielding some of them right now to counter the enemy's use of drones, most of which are sort of commercial, off-the-shelf, hobby store kind of drones that you could buy at the mall. They're employing these things against us to watch us. They've used them to control indirect fire, direct indirect fire. They've used them even to attack our positions by dropping small explosive devices, and in some cases, in at least one or two cases, they've landed an explosive Trojan horse, if you will, near coalition forces and enticed, in one case, some Iraqi forces to go pick it up and bring it into their position to examine it and it exploded. So this is a significant threat to us now, and so we're fielding a lot of capabilities to protect our soldiers from this new threat.
About 10 minutes left with General Townsend, the Commanding General of Operation Inherent Resolve. To North Carolina, Will is waiting. Line for Republicans. Will, go ahead.
Yes, my question is also a question on technology. With our air superiority and our air power, how can ISIS remain on the battlefield? Why don't we have, 1,000 or 10,000 drones in the sky watching every move, every minute, every second? It seems to me that our superiority, both technologically and in the air, would keep them from even breathing over there, coming out of their hole. Could you answer that, please?
Go ahead, General.
Sure, Will. Thanks. No army in the history of warfare has been able to be everywhere all the time. So despite our superiority in technology, wherever we are, we can dominate. and we can have insights. We can't be everywhere all the time. There aren't 10,000 drones watching. Even 10,000 drones wouldn't watch every square inch of Iraq and Syria around the clock. There's these other inconvenient factors like nighttime. We can usually see through that. Cloud cover, hard to see through that. Bad weather, hard to see through that. Smoke from oil well fires. So we've seen the enemy use some very creative techniques to include setting oil wells on fire to create giant clouds of black smoke and environmental disasters, all in an attempt to thwart our eye in the sky, if you will. Also, we can't see through buildings, and maybe someday, but we can't yet. And so ISIL in Mosul, for example, is able to have, to a large degree, freedom of movement. Can't see underground. He digs tunnels and moves in subterranean passages under cities. He moves from building to building through walls. And so it's very difficult for us to see what ISIL is doing in cities. In the open desert, it's easier, still challenged, even with our modern technology, to see through vegetation, for example. So if he stays undercover, it's really hard to see, whether that cover be an oil well, fire, cloud, or dense vegetation, or a building. It's hard for us to see the enemy. But even if we could, we wouldn't be able to see him everywhere all the time.
Back to that line for Iraq War veterans. Jim is in New York, an independent. Jim, go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like to ask the General, and I've been watching this whole segment, but I haven't heard anything mentioned at all about the Kurds / Peshmerga and their role in the Battle of Mosul. And I just wanted to ask the General if he could comment on that.
We'll let him expand on it. Go ahead, General.
Okay, thanks. I think it was Jim. Thanks for your question about the Kurdish Peshmerga. So, actually, the Kurdish Peshmerga, that's a semi-autonomous region in northern Iraq where the ethnic Kurds are the majority, and their security forces up there are referred to as Peshmerga. And the Peshmerga they've done quite a remarkable job in defending Iraq from ISIL. So they were involved in stopping ISIL's onslaught in 2014. They lost territory to ISIL just like the rest of the Iraqi security forces did. They eventually stiffened their defense along with the Iraqis and coalition help. They were able to stop ISIL's advance. Since then, they've been fairly constant in reversing ISIL's gains and regaining lost territory. They have, in fact, helped the Iraqis regain territory, and they were instrumental in the operation at Mosul. They allowed the Iraqi army up behind their Kurdish lines so they could attack from positions protected by the Kurds. The Kurds protected the Iraqi army staging areas so that the Iraqi army could uncoil and prepare for the attack unmolested by the enemy. The Kurds then advanced their line in a major offensive operation that pushed forward between 6 and 10 kilometers towards Mosul. Then they stopped and allowed the Iraqi army to pass through, and since then they have continued to clear ISIL out of those rear areas where they might have been bypassed, and they have protected the Iraqi army's lines of communication, their logistics, their reinforcements, their replacements, their casualties being evacuated. They provided casualty care at their hospitals to support the Iraqi army. So the Kurdish government and the Kurdish Peshmerga have helped Baghdad and the Iraqi security forces and the coalition a lot.
Just a few minutes left with General Townsend. Gary's in Pikeville, Kentucky, Republican. Go ahead.
Yes. Well, a caller before really was my question, with the technology. We saw on TV, hundreds of ISIS fighters on deserted highways, while they weren't taking out them. But now that they've dug into these cities, how hard is it to identify the fighters once you get in, and I know there's a lot of casualties, innocent people are killed. But as they flee, how can you identify those that's fleeing, whether they're ISIS fighters? Do they come out with their trucks or whatever they're driving with the guns? Or, that's my question, I realize, once they dig in, it's so many casualties.
General, go ahead.
Okay, thanks for your question there. Right, so it is very difficult to identify the enemy. I wish that we still saw parades of hundreds of ISIL fighters with their flags flying in their trucks. Well, they don't do that anymore. They haven't done that for quite some time now. The last time they tried that, they tried to break out of Fallujah last summer, early last summer, with their flags on their trucks and their guns in the back, and the coalition and the Iraqi security forces slaughtered them in large numbers. Since then, they have not tried to do that. And so when they move now in the open, they conceal their weapons. They take the guns out of the back of the trucks. They take down the flags. And they keep a very low profile, which makes it very difficult. We do have ways to tell, which I won't go into here. But it is a challenging problem, and we have to work very hard. And we do work very hard to identify the enemy before we strike, because we're concerned about striking innocents. So it's a challenge. It's an area that the enemy is trying to take advantage of, and we're working just as hard to not allow them to have that advantage.
General, speaking of challenges and complicating factors, there's a story at today's Wall Street Journal about the Russian efforts in Syria, about the Russian flotilla that's in the Mediterranean assisting the Assad regime against the rebel fighters there. Can you talk about Russia's military presence in your theater and how that's complicating your efforts?
Okay, sure. So for the most part, the Russian operations in Syria don't have a huge impact on our operations and what we're doing. They are mostly focused on fighting the civil war that one of the callers referred to earlier, and propping up the Assad regime. We're focused on fighting ISIL and defeating ISIL in Syria. And so occasionally our forces come near or in contact with theirs. We have means to deconflict our operations with them. They'll fly through the airspace in Iraq and Syria on occasion. Those engagements are usually very professional and disciplined, and they go their way and we go ours. So for the most part, not a huge impact to our operations. Their focus is different than our focus. So we basically see and avoid each other.
And General, we have about a minute or two left with you before you go. Just want to ask you about U.S. service member casualties in this effort in Operation Inherent Resolve. I believe the last 2 U.S. casualties were part of bomb disposal units. Can you talk about the danger of that job, and if anything more is being done or can be done to protect those soldiers?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So our service members, U.S. service members and coalition members, service members are in harm's way over here. Some in more than others, especially those out further on the battlefield helping our partners. So you mentioned the bomb disposal technicians. Our last 2 Americans that we've lost here in action were both EOD, explosive ordnance disposal technicians. All of our troopers out there are in harm's way to one degree or another. If you're here in this country or in Syria, you're in harm's way. So we take every measure we can to protect our service members. At some point, those out that are helping our partners to be successful, bringing them capabilities, and explosives disposal is one of those capabilities that they're sort of lacking in, and we're trying to build that up. So any of those service members that are out there doing those tasks will be at an increased risk, I think. And first of all, my heart and our condolences go out to their families of Chief Petty Officer J.J. Finan and Senior Chief Petty Officer Scott Dayton, our most recent casualty. God bless them and their families and their teammates. So we try to protect all of our troops. Our troops are volunteers. They know what they're about, and they know the risk involved, And they're trying to take care of themselves, and we're trying to take care of them as we go about this important work that is important not only for Iraq and Syria, but it's important for the United States, and it's important for the entire world that this evil scourge, this blight on the world called ISIL, is eradicated.
Well, General, we'll end it there. Want to thank you not just for your time, but for your service as well, and for talking to our viewers here on the Washington Journal.
Thanks for having me.
Up next on the Washington Journal, we'll be joined by Max Stier. He's president and CEO of the Partnership for Public Service. We'll talk about Donald Trump's transition process with the inauguration now just 9 weeks away. And later, we'll be joined by former NATO Secretary General Anders Rasmussen. He'll talk about the future of transatlantic relations under a President Donald Trump. We'll be right back.